Hello, my fellow readers. I, Dark Symphony 777, with a fan fiction reading. As always, a link to the story will be in the description below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, click on that bell for notifications, and leave a comment in the comment section below on your thoughts of the story. So, the story I am doing a reading of is Joachim by K.D. Zeal. It is a Castlevania fanfiction, and this story was suggested to me by Lady Armister herself. So, let's get into it. The sun has always been my enemy. Since before I can remember, when I was young, any time spent in the sun's light rendered me brilliant red, so I learned to avoid it. Not an easy task when one lives in a desert. I spent most of my childhood covered in layers of felt, hiding in the tent with a peeling nose. No wonder I learned to hate the sun, is it? It was a blessing for me, therefore, when Mother fell from her horse. All I knew at the time was that we were leaving the vast desert and my nose could finally heal. I was too young to understand why Mother couldn't see me, why Father snapped at me all the time, why the servants all told me to be quiet. It was only when they placed Mother on the pyre and set the torch to the wood that I began to understand what death was. It meant stillness, pallor, chill. It meant no more hugs, no kisses, no laughter, and no love. It was the end of childhood. Father, though a younger son of the Duke, still managed to inherit something when the Lord died. He remarried shortly after that, and I was shunted to the shadows, where, to be honest, I was perfectly happy. I was not bade to be in the public eye, and I knew it. I was what you might know as an albino. My skin as pale as Mother's corpse, and hair to match. Add light rose eyes, a reputation much in tatters due to my enforced nightlife. Perhaps you can understand why I was glad to fade into the shadows. As I grew, however, I began to realize that my happiness could not last. I was, after all, Father's eldest son, and therefore next to inherit. Never mind that I didn't want the title. Blood was blood. My stepmother knew this as well as I, and shared my liking for the situation. Like a good mother, she wanted her own son to rule. I was nearing 20 springs when Father fell sick, and his caring wife began to make her wishes known. I wanted nothing much more to be allowed to live my life in peace, and I knew that was not possible in Father's house. I had been something of a scholar, had nothing better to do during the long nights of my life, so I temporarily returned to the pastime. And in the course of my studies, I found, as hope, an answer to my problem. In a book I had copied myself, from the stories a singer had told me when I was new to this land, there was mention of a forest of eternal night, a fanciful tale surely told to gullible. But when I checked the location of a forest against the map, I found a blank space liberally sprinkled with warnings of devils and demons. That didn't bother me. The map said the same of my birthplace. Father died in the evening, as fortuitous as he knew my plan and did what he could to aid me. I paid my respect at his deathbed, accepting his blessings as a dutiful son, and in truth, I did grieve his passing. But there was no time for mourning. If I did not leave, and soon, there would shortly be another death in this house. I dressed myself in dark colors, both in respect for the dead and practicality. And then, under the covers of the half-moon, I slipped from my house, leaving my signet ring and all else to enable my stepmother to claim my house and title for her own son. I was off to the eternal night, to the forest of eternal night. My journey was not easy, of course, not least because of my need to hide from the sun. Oh, I could travel during the day if I chose, but then I would be red and likely have blisters and possible infection to deal with, none of which I had the patience for, and so I traveled exclusively at night, and got along well enough. I reached the edge of the bank area on my map after about a week and near dawn. There was a forest, deep and cool and green. I entered only the fringe of the trees and watched the sky. As the sun began to rise in the east, I looked to the north, to the heart of the forest. My eyes began to tear from the brilliance, and I retreated some ways further into the shadows of the wood. As the sky lightened until blue shone even to the west, the sky to the north remained dark. Almost shouting in joy, my eyes still streaming from the light and skin beginning to burn after even so short a time, I ran to the north. To the endless night it promised. As the forest thickened, light grew dim and diffused. But even so, it was obvious where the day ended and the unnatural night began. I gleefully crossed the border, thinking only now that I found a place where I could live as I wished, where I could wake when I wanted, a place where my night life would not be strange, for it would be shared by everything I met. I lived my new life alone in the woods for some time. I did not know how long. There were difficulties, here is everything, for I had never lived in a forest before, never depended on nature for my food and as shelter, and never engaged in gentlemanly pursuits such as hunting. Still, I made my way without any feelings of deprivation. I didn't even miss human company, for I had little enough as a youth. The moon, always full, shone on the lake where I was bathing that night, or evening, or whichever hour it was. I shivered slightly as I submerged in the water that had never known the sun's touch. When I surfaced, there was a man on the shore, a big man with a full dark cloak and blood-red hair. He was watching me curiously, and I did the same. Waiting for him to speak, he was as full of color as I was empty, and I smiled at the dichotomy. He must have thought I was smiling at him, for he broke the silence with a question. "So, you find me pleasing?" he asked, seemingly pleased himself. "I find you confusing," I corrected. "Did you not know onto whose land you wandered?" I shrugged. "I knew of no men in this forest myself," I replied, walking to the shore. A strange man studied me as I dressed, and I found myself blushing at his appraisal. I spoke to cover my unease. "I am Joachim Armister." He bowed in recognition of my introduction. "And I am Walter Bernhardt, master of this forest. Perhaps you would do me the honor of guesting at my castle?" I knew of no reason to refuse, though I suspected there were in fact many. I nodded my assent, and only then noticed that Walter's eyes seemed as red as my own. Though he obviously did not share my condition, I resolved to ask him about it at some later date, when I knew his moods better. For now, I simply followed him to his castle. I had lived in Walter's castle for nearly a week, and in that time he never broke bread with me. Though we often sipped a glass of red wine, after dinner we would retire to the salon to talk. Walter, as I expected, knew little of what had passed in recent years, though his grounding in history was quite thorough. At the time, I had told him everything of my life and why I had sought out his forest. He smiled when he learned of my enmity with the sun. "We are not so dissimilar, you and I," he said. "We are called daemons, and yet we are not. How happy mankind is to give the label daemon." I was puzzled, for my host had spoken little of his past. "They call you a demon? Why would they ever do that?" "Why, you have shown me naught but hospitality." Walter's eyes flashed briefly, as though in anger. "The face I show you is not what humanity sees. You intrigue me, Joachim. Caught my interest as none have done for a century." Fear tingled in my breast for the first time since leaving my father's house. "Walter, your words confuse me. Speak plainly, I entreat you." "If you wish, Joachim," he replied, standing. The moonlight shone from behind him, and a shadow fell over me as I sat in my chair. He became, for that moment, a creature of menacing power such as I had never known. I whimpered and looked to run, but in the midst of my fear, Walter spoke gently to me. "Do not fear me, Joachim, my friend. I do not wish you harm. I only wish you the best. I would give you a gift." As he spoke, he seemed to lessen, until it was only the man I knew. Now, however, I was aware of the edge of power and menace that had always accompanied him. I tried to speak, swallowed, moistened my lips, then croaked out, "A gift, to frighten me to death." "I sought your understanding," Walter countered. "You asked me to speak plainly. You're not human." I stood and stepped toward him. "What are you? You're not a man, yet you deny the name of demon." "Indeed I do, for I am not from the pits of hell. I am a vampire." Walter spoke with such dignity and pride that I did not immediately understand his words. I stumbled back into the chair. "What do you want from me?" Walter glided over to me and caressed my cheek with a grave, cold hand. "I want you, Joachim. Simply you. Mortality grows weary when spent alone. This week I have been fulfilled as never before. I want you, Joachim, forever." His voice shook with passion, and his ruby's eyes filled with pain as I flinched from his hand. He turned from me and walked to the window. "I have pained you. My gate is open if you wish to leave." I remained motionless, frozen by my conflicting feelings. If I left, I knew I would have to leave the forest, or in time I would answer Walter's plea. If I stay, I would simply be succumbing earlier. And why should I not? I did not fear the church's warning, and if I could not die, then I was free from karma as well. I stood and approached Walter. He turned when I was a dozen steps away, his face impassive. Did not hesitate in my journey. He lifted his arms, and I walked into his embrace. There was only a moment of pain. The joys of my new state of time for a time overwhelmed me. I had nothing to fear save the sun, which I was used to fearing, and it could not touch me here, not in the forest of eternal night. Thirst did not trouble me, for Walter took care, and first that it was quenched, and later showed me how I might care for myself. He taught me well, with care in every lesson, and yet slowly I realized I was not truly his equal. It did not bother me at first, but the more I thought on it, the more I resented his rule, his arrogance, and his autocratic behavior. The root of the problem was that in this, As in all my life, I had not truly had a choice. I could have left the forest, or so I wanted to believe. But there was no life for me in the world outside. Yet by staying, either in the castle or the forest, I opened a part of myself to hear Walter's plea. And so, despite all of appearance, he had risked nothing in his relation to me. This knowledge wore at me, until I saw that in that one act everything in him that I was coming to hate. If he knew of my growing feelings, he did not seem to care. Walter gave me the task of starting his games, of bringing to him the mortals with which he enticed the hunters. He loved to play with the vampire hunters, to torment them through their love for his captives. I saw the game play out until I could quote it, as though it was a farcical play. My new hate found a focus on the day I brought a small girl to the castle. She was very young, not more than 5, with mahogany hair and frightened brown eyes. I cared almost nothing for humanity now, but never before had the prize been so innocent. I used the girl surely as Walter did, used her to sharpen and heat my hate, used the thought of her suffering to carefully feed my fury with Walter's machinations. And I returned to her house, to the father who grieved for her even when girding for the battle to come. I told him I knew how to defeat Walter. It was a lie, mostly. I knew Walter believed himself beloved by the night, and I knew the forest had eternal night. I knew that defeating Walter in the cover of moonlight was next to impossible. I knew he possessed something that caused the perpetual night, but that was where my knowledge ended. What he possessed, I didn't know. Though I guessed he would keep it about his person, I spoke as though I knew where and what the object was. I said I would get it for him, and weaken Walter. Ronaldo, for that was the man's name, was reluctant to trust me, and I could not blame him. But seeing himself without option, he accepted my offer. I told him what to expect in the castle, of the monsters he must defeat before he can even see Walter. I promised that when the vampire stood before him, he would be vulnerable. He said that Ronaldo could easily defeat him then, and take his daughter. I even meant it. The bargain struck, I went to the castle to speak with Walter under the pretense of watching for the game to begin. Walter was waiting for me, lips twisted in his ear. "So," he said, "you, too, would turn against me, Joachim? You will possess this castle for yourself, and with it the power of the ebony stone?" As he spoke, he thrust forth a pendant, which held a stone of half-fist size. "That cannot be, my friend, my child. Have you forgotten? I sired you. You must obey my will." I struggled, but was bound by invisible bonds. I was bound to his will. How was that? By the blood he had gifted me. "Go now to the dark palace of waterfowls. Go to a room furthest back, beyond the long bridge. You will fight all who come there, and only when you are defeated are you to be released from my will." Walter turned from me. I felt myself drawn to the door. I became one of the monsters that guarded Walter's throne. The green stone became mine to keep, to be given only to the one who defeated me, and in doing so released me. Ronaldo never reached me, which was perhaps for the best. Walter took great care to tell me how the human had been brought low by the succubus illusions. 5 swords were given into my command, each so huge I could only wield it by vampiric strength. In a short time I had learned to throw them about by the simple power of my mind. Walter seemed truly concerned that I'd never be beaten, and after one close fight he added 3 mystic orbs which shielded me until all were removed. To make future battles harder, the orbs regenerated. To an extent, I was grateful for the shield. I figured that if a hunter could not overcome my shield, they could not hope to defeat Walter. If that were true, Walter would reign for a very long time. Only a handful of warriors succeeded in hurting me, and in every case they were far too spent to win. Not many hunters reached me, however. My part of the castle was the most heavily guarded, with the most fiendish traps second only to the pagoda of the misty moon where Walter himself waited. Time passed very slowly, with only the relentless sound of rushing water coming faintly to my room. I came to hate that room very quickly. Now, of course, I could never leave it. After a time, with nobody but hunters coming for me, I began to go quite mad. It had been a very long time since the last hunter, close to 2 years, I think, when he came. A young hunter, beautiful, really, with pale blonde hair and ice blue eyes. There was something different about this hunter, something I felt the moment I saw him. He wore black, with a white surcoat trimmed in red. He carried no bladed weapon, only a whip and a cross. The cross, and a wreath in the holy symbol, a yellow stone shield. This hunter had beat succubus. He was looking right at me, but couldn't seem to see me. When he asked, "Is someone there? Are you a prisoner here?" I leaned forward, out of the shadows, surprised that he would talk to me. "Who are you?" I wanted to know the name of the hunter with no fear. "My name is Leon. And you are?" I began walking toward him, my third semi-orders pairing, telling me which I knew what I had to do. My name is Joachim Armster. He deserves to know that. It's too bad you aren't Walter, I allowed my eyes to glow. His feeling. Are you a vampire? Yes, right, lowly human, I snapped. He only now just figured that out. Why is a vampire locked away here? The hunter asked foolishly. Shut up! Tim Walter. I would have won it if were it not for his ebony stone. Not the strict truth, but how dare this man pry into my life? Ebony stone? What's that? If you want to know. Beat me, I declared, calling my swords. They left it out of the ground and began to whirl around me. It'll be a nice prelude to defeating Walter. I narrowed my eyes and pointed at the human, angry at his prying. I'll beat you to a pulp! When the battle started, I learned what made this hunter, Leon, feel so different. He moved with almost feline grace, and was nearly as fast as I. When he lashed out with the whip, I saw it burn with the air and scorch the stone. I was safe behind my shield, and so felt nothing. But I shuddered at the thought that this man might discover my weakness. If he took out the shield, he would certainly win. The hunter's eyes widened as I shrugged off the attack. I sent my swords at him through the ground, smoothly dodging as he attacked me again. It didn't hurt, but being hit slowed me down. I didn't like that. I was too confident, however, and not paying attention to where I was. The flaming went right by my hand, smashing into one of the orbs that generated my shield. The hunter noticed and looked around the room, nodding in realization. I cursed to myself as the human ceased attacking me. I sent my swords at him again, setting two to spinning and slicing at them after him. He backflipped over the whirling blades, then jumped up and thrashed another orb. I could feel my shield weakening noticeably. I blasted a spell at the hunter. My swords gathered round me and circled. The power they generated directed at me. I caught it and sent it toward the hunter in a brilliant beam of light. The hunter dodged and went for the last orb. My increased offense only proved to him that he was on the right path. The orb shattered and the subtle glow of my shield vanished. The hunter smiled as he attacked me with whip and cross. The pain burned through me, and I was reminded suddenly of my childhood under the sun. His assault continued, and I was buffeted about like a doll. The pure fury of his human's attack stunned me. He was fighting with passion, something I had done only once, against Walter. I knew then that I would be beaten. I knew that Walter would likely fall against the strength of this hunter's anger. Knowing that I would lose, however, was different from actually being beaten. Until the hunter beat me, I could not leave, nor could I stop fighting, which I would gladly have done, but as this man defeated me, it would be very likely that he had killed me. I had never actually considered dying before. I was too determined to kill Walter. The battle continued for many minutes longer, until I was so weak I could not even hold myself off the ground. My sword fell with a clatter, and I found myself kneeling at his feet. I waited for the final lash, which could claim my life. When none came, I looked to see why. To think, I lost to a human, I murmured, too used to winning. Leon gestured at me with the whip. You promised. Answered me. What is the ebony stone? Might as well. Had promise. And it might just help him. A stone made with alchemy. It creates the never-ending darkness in this forest. Hence eternal night, he mused. But the night should help you as well, since you're a vampire, he added, the question obvious in his voice. I grimaced weakly. That stone chooses its master. My power was pale beside his. If only I had the crimson stone. But I didn't, and never would. There was no point in mourning it. I invoked one more of my vampiric powers, then screamed and faded away into a purple mist. As I faded, I watched the hunter leave. The door was left open, and Walter's will no longer bound me. Still as mist, I weakly followed out the door and out the dark palace that had helped me for so many years. I was free, and if the hunter didn't kill Walter, then I would. I went only as far as the cabin I found outside the castle. Still as mist, I billowed into the cabin, for I was curious as to who lived here, so close to Walter's castle. There had been no one here when I was locked away, and Walter never told me of anyone here. Inside the home, an old man stood behind a counter, looking at the items on his shelf, his back to me, so I only saw they had powerful form and iron-gray hair. It wasn't until he heard that I recognized him as the man with whom I formed my long-ago allegiance. I coalesced, drawing myself together until I fell into the ground in man form, still weak to stand. Ronaldo, I gasped before falling into blackness. I was not unconscious for long, leaving the healing sleep at the insistent shacking of another. I opened my eyes to find Ronaldo bent over me, his expression torn between anger and confusion. What are you doing here? I struggled to a sitting position. I might ask you of the same. Ask the same of you, Walter. Knew of our deal. He imprisoned me, binding me to protect him until I was defeated. There was no harm in telling him my tale. If he was with Walter, he knew it already. If he was not, then I did not wish to alienate him. Ronaldo stood and moved back to the counter. It was you who told Leon of the ebony stone, was it not? The hunter. Yes. You know him. Where is he? I've been giving him what help I can. He went to fight Walter almost an hour ago. There was concern in Ronaldo's voice. If he has not returned by now, it is unlikely he will ever return, I said gravely. I cared little for Leon. I wanted to kill Walter myself. But the thought of Walter beating this hunter chilled me. I almost began to doubt my ability. Ronaldo nodded. I know. The vampire still has the ebony stone, and with it he is invulnerable to mortals. As he spoke, he was watching me carefully. I inclined my head. I seek his destruction still, but you must know that if I win, very little will change. The forest of eternal night shall still be ruled by one beloved by the night. I was asking those words if Ronaldo will then challenge me. My grievance is with Walter. Do not play the games he does, and there will be no reason for any to hunt you. Once I can stand, I will go to the castle. If I do not return, I have lost. I have nothing that can aid you. Once within the castle, you are on your own. I nodded and lay back on the floor. I expected no less. I will sleep here until I have healed enough to go. Ronaldo gave me no answer, merely returning to his shelves. I sighed and cast myself into sleep. When I awoke, Ronaldo was gone, completely and utterly. I was not bothered. He could not have helped me anyway. I floated out of the cabin, still a little weak and hungry, but I figured I could take care of that in the castle. I made the Anti-Souls Mystery Lab my first destination, as I vaguely remembered that it was the easiest area. The door to Pagoda was still sealed, and Walter hadn't come out to greet me, so he didn't know I was coming. He probably thought the hunter had killed me. As I went through the lab, I combed every corner of the dusty hallways, hoping to find the items that could aid me. Well, as I had hoped, I found various alchemical crystals, which I could use to increase my health and magic. Greatly cheered, I continued hunting until I found a room filled with shattered stone. As I approached, the rubble pulled together to form a stone golem. I remembered Walter building this thing, and used that knowledge to demolish it. When I was finished, what was left could not even be called rubble. Next on my mental list was the House of Sacred Remains. I was basing the order from what little the various hunters had said. I'm not sure what monster I had fought before the blue orb was. It appeared to be, well, it didn't look much at all, but really, it died as easy as the golem. The garden forgotten by time and the ghostly theater were nearly as easy. I was immune to Medusa's stone gaze, and the succubus had no illusions with which to tempt me. With 4 orbs in my possession, I entered the dark palace of waterfalls, resolutely reminding myself that I would not become trapped. I could not measure how my strength had grown, but as I shredded the mirror fork that opposed me, and I saw that it indeed increased. Then in a large square room, I faced a doppelganger of the hunter who had defeated me. Fear alone lowered my skill for crucial long moments. I recoiled in pain as the attacks hit, but the pain was not the sweeping agony I feared. I smiled wickedly and fought back, confidence restored. I failed to destroy the doppelganger, however. It ran and escaped into the sewers. I didn't bother to pursue it, having other concerns on my mind. The doppelganger had not dropped the green stone, and without it I could not reach Walter. I continued on through the palace, finally approaching the room that had been my prison. I paused a moment, lightly stroking the door, and I sighed and pushed it open. It didn't matter if this was a trap or not. I had to proceed. I gilded into the room and found myself facing myself. I had known I was difficult to fight, but it was only now I could realize how powerful I was. I had an advantage, however, as I already knew about the shield and how to circumvent it. I wasted no time on my double, first taking out the power orbs, then shattering his shield. When he was vulnerable, I used my strongest spell, blasting the power my swords gave me at my enemy. When at last my double fell, I watched blankly. He had said no word, and died in silence. I tried to analyze my feelings, at last deciding that I felt troubled. It was odd, seeing myself died. The thing faded away, and the green orb appeared. I gladly took it and left that place, hoping never to return. I walked into the courtyard with the 5 orbs in my possession. 5 colored pillars, which corresponded to the orbs, began to shine brightly. And suddenly the spell circle protecting Walter's door faded and vanished. I gilded up the stairs and at last entered the pagoda of the misty moon, for the first time since I had been forced to leave. The first room stank of pain and death. I reeled back a step, momentarily overwhelmed. I looked around. seeking to find the source of the stench, but I saw nothing. There was no blood on the white marble, no nicks and cracks in the wood banister. Cautiously, I inhaled it again. I was able now to distinguish 3 scents. A mortal, a vampire, and something in between. Leon, Walter, and the prize. I decided, strangely sorrowful. A few rooms further in, I was still thinking of how the hunter had met his death. Almost as summoned by my thoughts, Leon appeared blue-tinged. He smiled at me, and I stopped. For a moment, I truly thought this was Leon, turned perhaps by Walter. But then he moved, and my better judgment returned. This was not the hunter, merely the doppelganger that had fought in the sewers. The battle was even easier than before, and this time the creature had nowhere to run. The other monsters I fought, while the hardest in the castle, were not a match for me. Finally, I climbed the stair to the death head door that led to Walter's throne room. It was the only room in the castle that I had not searched, and therefore the only place he could be. I waited a long moment, wrestling with my fears, before finally reached out and opened the door. "What did you do to the hunter?" I asked as I entered. Walter sat in his throne, looking out of the window. He turned as I spoke. "He didn't kill you," he sneered angrily. I didn't answer, and Walter shrugged slightly. "He wasn't pleased when I returned his beloved to him, so I killed him." I had already known that. I wanted to know how Leon had died. Walter wasn't going to tell me, though. Still, I was unexpectedly angry. Angry that Walter should kill such a man while hiding behind his ebony stone. I wondered if that stone would save him from me. "Damn you, Walter. Your life has reached its end," I howled in hatred, launching myself at him. As my first volley arched towards Walter, I saw fear in his eyes. I knew in the moment before my slice sliced into him that I would be successful. The blades bit into his white skin, and blood splashed into the floor. The battle was won at my moment. Still, I still had to fight it. The fight was far less difficult than I expected. Walter was out of practice, used to hiding behind the power of his ebony stone. My swords pierced him all at once, twisting him into 5 steel spikes. He screamed, then began to laugh. "You may have defeated me now, but my soul is eternal. I shall regenerate and come for you, Joachim." Walter gasped out in a kind of manic joy. He faded into mist while I watched, helpless to stop him. The mist was drawn upward, and suddenly a black hole appeared in the roof. The mist drifted towards it, seeming to fight, to pull away. A loud mental screeching began, and continued until the mist was pulled into the hole. A rather cold laughter began then, and a man I did not know came through the window, carried by a bony hand. He was pale, with long dark hair and sickly frame. Good. Good. I knew you could do it. He stopped laughing and looked at me, confusion suddenly showing on his face. "Not Leon. Where is he?" "Dead. By Walter's hand. I have avenged him. Inadvertently, maybe, but I still had. Now, who are you, and what are you doing in my castle?" But it was sweet saying that. "It is mine. I am the owner of the Crimson Stone. I am your master, Matthias Conquest." I snarled. "Another alchemy orb, and a fool who will master me. You are master of no one, Matthias. I shall defeat you, as I defeated Walter." Matthias' pale eyes narrowed. "A crimson home gives me power over death. If you do not bow to me, then death shall feast on your soul." I laughed at him. "I have no soul. Too weak to face me yourself? You send a proxy to fight for you? I do not fear death. Let it come." Brave words, I didn't care. If I lost to death, it did not matter. Better that than to live under another. Death began to manifest in the throne room. Matthias was laughing again. "If you beat it, I shall leave you in peace." He laughed. The world faded out, and I find myself in another realm, standing on a spell disc. Death circled just beyond the disc. I sighed, slumped for just a moment, then strengthened and launched myself into battle. I was tested to the limits of my ability. Death's size killed my bones, and his attacks threatened to melt my skin away. He called self-destructive minions that exploded in my face, and even worse, my attacks seemed not to touch him. Despite my brave words, I doubted my ability to beat death. I called my swords to surround me, to pull power from the air and give it to me. Once more, using my own body as a focus, I collected the power and shaped it, setting the boat at the bony specter. At long last, he showed pain. Running from my blow, I redirected my attack, hitting him again before I ran out of power. Death redoubled his attacks, calling fire from the skies and sending me running. Even running, I countered. Using this time, my swords obviously bit into death. The specter screamed and sent his sight spinning after me. I backflipped over and ran closer to death. His attacks seemed hampered when I was close. I still wasn't easy, But at last he faded, the throne room returned, and I knelt on the floor, panting. I had beaten death. I had beaten death. I had won. I was my own master. I stood up and stumbled to the door, out to the balcony. I looked out. Over the castle. It was mine now. All of it. The moon shone on my face, caressed my hair, and I felt a new strength fill me. I felt a weight on my chest, and I looked down. A black orb hung down from a pendant around my neck. I took the stone and held it up. The moonlight filled with a smoky luminescence. The ebony stone, I murmured. I didn't know how it came to me, or where it come from. It was enough, for now, that it was there. It was mine. I was master of castle and beloved by the night. I turned away from the balcony. Returning to the throne, I felt like a play-acting child as I sat on the throne. I settled into it, sitting like a king. A smile began to play along my lips, and I shifted, sitting negligently. That was mine, and I would sit however I wanted. A lock of white hair fell into my face, and I brushed it away. Ha! I chuckled. Ha 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 ha! My laughter filled the empty room, echoing off the stone walls. Ha 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 ha! So that is Joachim. It's a short story. It's basically just a shortened version of the Joachim mode from Laminate Innocence. It's unspectacular. I mean, it's okay. It's basically just here's his past, here's his present, here's his end. Like beginning, middle, end. That's it. It's simple as simple can get. Nothing. It's nothing unspectacular. I can't give it a high rank because it has no substance. Like it has a idea, but there are other ideas that did it better. Melancholia, but for what it is, it's just there. Like it's just really there. Like it's okay, but unspectacular. I give it a 2 out of 5. It's not bad. It's just really nothing unique. It's just really there. So that is my reading of Joachim by Katie Zeal. This has been Dark Symphony 777 and cut.